So, welcome everybody to another edition of Ideas Untrapped Policy Shop, where we just talk about what we want in the manner we want and try to make it as rational, reasonable, and free as possible. And my guest today needs no introduction actually, but I'm a big fan of his thoughts around jurisprudence and the law generally, but basically on everything he has opined on. So I'm glad to welcome Mr. Yemi Candide-Johnson. So he will be discussing with me today. So there's no way we won't talk about the election.
Sure. Hot topic.
So, because political power is at the center of everything, and it sort of shapes the direction with which things flow. So a couple of months ago, I'm sure you're aware there was this Twitter trend, all eyes on the judiciary. But first, I'll ask you, how did you think the judiciary fared this time around in terms of handling election litigations generally? What's your assessment?
Well, to assess the performance of anybody, you have to have the parameters on which you expect them to operate from the start. Very often people project their expectations on the judiciary. But one thing that I think is important to say is that the judiciary operates according to law, and the judiciary is not some revolutionary agency. The function of judiciary is stability, primarily, in society. Judges are not there to upturn the status quo, upturn the regular order. This is not their function, and they're there to administer the law. If you want to achieve the political result of upturning the political order, you have to achieve it by the regulation of the law. That's their function. So the expectations of the judiciary in the political space are excessive. But I think that examining the product of judicial determination in many cases, I can't say that I'm satisfied. I can't say that many of those decisions were wrong. I've had discussions with judges who have said, well, how do you put in somebody into power who didn't contest for the election, for example? These are and I've had this discussion with judges. Some of those decisions I've read, some I haven't read. And some judges say to me, well, have you read my decision? I read the lead judgment in that case. What do you think about this? And and some of these people have had discussions with the people for whose ability, intellect, and integrity I have the highest regard. So sometimes judges may have very difficult. I started by making it clear that I think that judiciary has a political function, but many judges are trying to do their work according to the line, the order, and the rules, and sometimes the result may be unusual. You ask for an assessment. If often I ask people questions, I say I don't want the analysis, I just want the answer. So having done the analysis, let me give you the answer. I think that the judicial product across a wide variety of subjects in Nigeria is unsatisfactory. I can't say judges are corrupt or judges are lazy. In every country you have judges who are corrupt and judges who are lazy. And in any individual case, you can say this may be attributable to corruption, laziness, incompetence. I don't know in any particular case, but because I have worked with the judiciary over many years, I know its capacity, I know where it has lack of capacity, I know where resources fail, and I know where much more can be done better. And I am not satisfied that it's fulfilling the quality of product that it shows.
Okay, so like the dimensions of your dissatisfaction, one thing I'd like to bring up. So we have cases where you have the courts resolving election litigation a year after the elections, 8 months, 7 months. So obviously there's a bit of a speed issue about the process of the courts. And secondly, maybe this is a bit of a rhetorical question. If, because a lot of people have also expressed similar dissatisfaction to yours, perhaps for different reasons, would it have been democratic for the courts to fulfill the wishes of the masses, or maybe a certain section of the masses, so to speak?
How do you measure that?
Well, maybe by making some decisions that certain parts of the electorate agree with.
Well, the purpose, an election is the device for testing the will of the people. We agree that the decision of the people, even though there may be dissent, is the result of the majority. The only mechanical device we have today for determining that is election. So when you say the will of the wide variety, we don't know what that is, except by the impaired device of elections. So your question is in fact beyond the role of the judiciary. It's the function of elections and whether that device is operating at the proper level here. I think that judges should not decide election disputes. I think judges should not decide who wins or who loses elections. The test, the mechanics, is to find out who wins the highest number of votes. But there's a process, there's a whole logistical system behind extracting the result of elections. And it is a terrain that is guided by law and by rules, and including by transport, fuel, NEPA. There's a whole variety of this logistical nightmare. But eventually, part of that process is that the legality will be tested in courts. That's part of the rules of the game. So at the end of the day, in any country, you have to do many things. You have to be sure you can get your people out on the day. You have to be sure that the highest number of people are persuaded by your arguments. And you have to ensure that you conform with law. I was one of the books I was reading recently was, I can't remember the last book Obama wrote, and he's talking about his senatorial election in Chicago, and how you have to get a specific number of votes by a specific number of voters. And this was the test, because he said he had these very, almost characterized them as anal assistants who insisted that this was where the work had to be done. And somebody had promised not to run. That was the reason why he decided to run for that seat. And then this person decided, because she couldn't get some other seats, I can't remember, the National Senate, he was running for the Senate in Illinois, decided she was going to run. And then she presented the same number of registered voters who had signed. And then his team started checking her certificates. And this was the entire legality which ended her Senate campaign. So she may have beat him on the day of the election, but she did not comply with the law. This is not unusual. In many countries where, I mean, in England, you haven't had election petition, maybe you've had one in the last 150 years, or 10 in the last 150 years, because the logistical system works in faithful adherence to the law. So it's unlikely that you're going to get a different result that you got on the field from the law courts. If the system is improved in quality, there will be less reason to go to courts. Question about whether the deputy governor of a state had the right certificate or not. Why should that be decided after the election? In my opinion, once the people have spoken, the people have spoken. It's a matter of numbers. I would not welcome challenges to people's, except they were for crime or for some sort of major deception. If a murderer stands before the electorate and they vote for him, that is how democracy works. It's my job, as a person who doesn't like murderers, to say to the electorate, this guy is a murderer, and this is the reason why you shouldn't vote for him, because it's going to be bad for you across the board. But if they decide they want the murderer, that's their right. That's the way democracy works. But then, because of inconsistency and uncertainty in judicial outcomes over a very complicated electoral law terrain, people recognize that there is an unusually high degree of chance that you can upturn the popular votes. That is problematic because it legitimizes the election outcome if somebody can. As far as I'm concerned, also, as a matter, the judges have to decide as a matter of policy what to do if there's a legal deficit in the result of the election. If if somebody has stood for election and he wasn't qualified, then the electorate has not given their decision. Do the election afresh. The idea of awarding the third or the fourth person is anti-democratic and is destructive of legitimacy, both of the electoral system and of the judicial system as well. Because the judges who say, well, we just acted according to law, have undermined public confidence in their own product. And this is bad for the entire democratic system of governance. The pillars on which a democratic government stands include the executive, include the legislature, and the judiciary. The function of the judiciary in resolving disputes is to give confidence to the wide majority of people that their rights will be recognized, they will be heard, and that the rules will be complied with. This is the job. And if people lose confidence in the judiciary, they will resort to other means to resolve the disputes. And this is destructive of the fabric of society.
So now I'm interested in that a bit, and I promise this is my last question on the election.
Okay. Well, yeah.
So how much latitude do judicial officers, in this case judges, have vis-a-vis some of our individual laws, the electoral law in this case, and the Constitution, which is like the ultimate document as far as the jurisprudence is concerned? Because you find cases where certain decisions are actually bizarre. You touched on some of it, certificates, the courts asking plaintiffs to produce original copies of documents that never existed, and things that actually violate common sense. And sometimes you can trace the origins of that to the electoral law itself. There was a time where you do not even have to count ballots. You can just write whatever you want in the result sheets, and that is what is legal. That is what the law recognizes as the result. And that is the law with which the courts will decide based upon, which is frankly bizarre. So how much latitude do judges have vis-a-vis relevant law or extant laws like the Electoral Act and the Constitution, and should I say basic common sense?
Political problems have to be solved by political means. And this question of malfeasance in elections is something that happens in many countries. If there's a problem with the way the result is extracted, it's for us to stop that problem. In your constituency, I did an election petition for the Youth Party maybe a couple of 3 years ago. And we told the judge that in one particular polling unit, there were 250 accredited voters, but 350 people voted. That therefore, this was on its face an unlawful electoral term. And the judge said we needed to produce the genuine one. But then the one that we faulted was produced by the Lagos State Electoral Commission. So the legality prevented us from solving that problem. So what you need to do next time is to solve that problem on the field and be sure that in many of those polling units where there were 12,000 people registered and 200 people turned up. So if 200 people turned up, it's very easy to write the election result. I was reading some years ago Yemi Carter's, I think his last book, and he ran for governor of Georgia twice. And the first time he ran for Georgia, he said that the chairman of the Democratic Party would regularly bring the ballots to his house and look at them and say, we're not having this, and we're having this. And this is exactly what happened in Georgia in 1951. So I'm sure it happens in other places even today, but it's not, cheating is not unusual. You hope that the law can stop it, but the first place to stop political problems is on the political field. And it's about power. You have to get up. We're talking earlier on about our elites. We're too comfortable. And I repeat myself, in the last election, I went to places which I never thought I needed to be. A friend of mine who was running political office. And I'd get out from the car, on many occasions, I'd tell them not to switch off the AC. I'd have to sit down in the car because I couldn't be walking about the streets. After a while, you say, look, I better sit down here. But this is what politicians do. You want the people to know. We can't pretend that we haven't chosen a democracy. Democracy means the will of the majority. The majority are not people like you. This morning, I was talking to my barber, and I hadn't seen him for ages because I decided I wanted someone else to cut my hair, but my daughter says to me, how can you ghost your barber after 20 years? So I said, so he came over and he's telling me stories about the things that I realized what I'd missed. I'd missed hearing the things that happen on the bus between here and Ikorodu. Because I'm going to sit down there and he's telling me all the things that happen. And the people there are very different. And the people who, the disgruntled Nigerian elite are the same predatory elite who want to extract the most they can from the system without consulting anybody else. So when some of my friends tell me, someone told me this morning that the current government is for Lagosians only. I said, well, this is somebody from Abeokuta, and half of his people are in the government. And I guess what he means is that I have not got what I want from this government. And that's the way we project our own personal interests over the needs of the people. So if you want a democracy, if you don't want a democracy, I can join those friends who are going to decide how we're going to settle the government of Nigeria, and that will work for us. But then we decided there's a good reason for democratic government. It's important for stability and for the common consent of people. You can have better development, you can have better accumulation of resources and increase your productivity if you have a government to which the majority of people adhere. So it's an important measure. So how it works is that we have to ask people who don't look like us what they think, and we have to take into account what they think as well. I mean, if you're running for president in America, you're going to consult, if you're from California, you're not going to consult people from California. You have to consult people in rural Michigan and Wyoming, and people who you may not even understand how they speak, even though it's English. You have to beg for votes if you want to build a democracy. You have to get your hands dirty. And I have to get down off the bus even when it's hot outside. That's a major sacrifice for me. Not really.
Yeah. So let's talk about the constitution for a minute.
Okay.
It's now maybe this is just an elite concern, like you said, we get that. It's if you go by common rhetoric, it's a widely reviled document. Some people will say that everything that is wrong in Nigeria boils down to our constitution. Whether it is the centralization of power, our resources are managed, certain laws. We talked about the Land Use Act earlier. What are the failures and the strength of the current Nigerian constitution? And again, speaking of amendments, why is the barrier to fixing some of the problems we have at the margins so difficult?
When lawyers talk of constitution, they speak of a legal document, and they obsess about the sections, about the breakdown of organization. But in reality, a constitution is a social contract. It's basically an agreement between the elements of a territory as to how to protect themselves, first of all, their common interests and values. You have to start, when you're building a constitution, from determining what is the interest within that territory, try to find common values, common ideas. For example, and again, I not that I like to, but I find the simplicity of the American Declaration of Independence to be very deep. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are simple things. So if we decide that that's what we want in this territory, then we have to make a constitution that allows us to have that. How do you do so? Well, we have a variety of competing interests. We have people from Edo State who think that you must have 6 wives. And we have people from Kano State who think that you can marry in a certain type of way. And you have people in Lagos who believe that you can marry as many as you want. those are different cultural, historical values. If you want to stay in the same territory, you have to decide how we can accommodate your own needs and my own needs. So we have to extract a value from each one of us, which is fundamental to all of us. That's what the Constitution is. Constitution is the enactment of the fundamental values of the society around which you organize, which requires consultation. The fundamental flaw of the 1999 Constitution is the failure to consult. It was created in secret by a group of people who believed in centralized power and who wanted to preserve their centralized power. A military structure, they believe in one thing, they believe in the unity of Nigeria, we give them that, but they believe that it should be conducted from the center of power. This was not what the peoples of Nigeria negotiated before independence. And many constitutional conferences have been held in Nigeria. These are well known, 1951, 1953, 1956, 1957, 58. And we've had a progression of constitutions since 1922. These constitutions were all the product of consultations designed to give reason for all the peoples of Nigeria to adhere to the unitary Nigerian territory. We're here by accident or by chance. I think that there's huge value in our being united in this one territory. But then you have to agree. So, guys, if you want to pursue cattle rearing in your states, you should do so. You should be allowed to regulate it. But then we want to pursue cocoa. We want to industrialize. We want to have a knowledge-based economy. We want to have an economy we want to do services. The degree of regulation by the federal government, which is authorized by the Constitution, is destructive of the capacity of the constituent elements to thrive. So that is a problem. And then why we have that is because we haven't consulted. And each time, some years ago, I remember having to write an article about the National Assembly bringing this bombshell about how they were reforming the Constitution. I couldn't see anything of any relevance to the proper order of society and all their proposed amendments. We need to disassemble the Constitution and fix the levels of government that are required for the level of output that are required at every level. Schools, drainage. I mean, you have to consult the Ministry of Works about a bridge in Lagos. It's problematic. Even the law school students are complaining they have to go to Abuja to get their certificate. Why? Why can't a state have its own law school and say you can practice law in federal government may set standards for elements of regulation and say every state should go and do it. So this is a problem. And again, the elites have thrived irrespective of how the Constitution is. So they haven't bothered to realize that the lack of consent to the document affects the stability and organization of our society, and it ultimately threatens their direct interests. We're getting to realize that because it's becoming fanciful and fashionable to talk about the Constitution, about restructuring, etc. And I think that more people are thinking more carefully about why it's necessary. Up to now, it's some sort of political sloganeering. People are saying they want this thing. And very often when an elite individual like myself starts talking about something, the first question I want to ask is what he's looking for. I don't trust his campaign or his slogans. So he has to explain to me why it benefits me, assuming I'm an ordinary Nigerian. Because I can get away with it. You see, if the drain in your local government isn't working, you should talk to your councillor or your local government chairman. And in many places, they talk to their street chairman, and the street chairman talks to local government. So in more rural and more less sophisticated communities, they have that traditional system of government. But people who live in Ikoyi and Victoria, they phone the governor, whether they voted for him or not. So they don't really care about the system of government. They will get the result that they want. And they don't believe in the rule of law because they think they can subvert it and it's meant to be subverted. So Simon Colorado, I think, wrote an article yesterday, which was the three enemies of Nigeria: ignorant masses, predatory elites, and I can't remember what the third one was. But then that predatory elite is the number one enemy of Nigeria. And we have to think, otherwise we're all lost. It's self-interest that causes elites to think of the people. If we don't settle these people, they will finish us. So the constitution, I mean, the simple question is you create a constitution out of need and out of values. Identify, do Nigerians believe in the right to life? If they do, then we must preserve it. I'm not sure that they do. I don't know what you think. Maybe when we're talking later, we might discuss what are the values upon which our society is founded. What do we believe in? That's how you create a constitution. That is the problem. So all this tinkering, and the people who are tasked with reforming our constitution very often are aloof, entitled elites in the National Assembly. They're great. Once you get to the National Assembly, you're made. Why do you want to bother? They don't even go to their constituencies, except at election time. And when they come out to election time, they know that what the people want that is the bread for today. And really, if the people want the bread for today, and they will give you their consent to that basis, why do you complain? The democracy is working. The democracy is working. If 100,000 people will take 1,000 naira from me and vote for me, we criminalize that because we think it's a bad thing, that their consent should be free. But if they take it and they sell their own rights, why do you think I shouldn't be elected on those 100,000 votes? Very often people who complain that votes have been bought do not participate in the political process. They sit down on election day, they're having barbecues. They have not mobilized the people around them. So when someone tells me that this election was rigged, I say, look, you come from Shagamu. How many people do you know in Shagamu? And how many people will follow you to vote? Can you get 100 people? They can't. Because they don't know who you are. You're all the elite from all the states in Nigeria living in Lagos. All of them are living in Lagos. So when it's election time, they want to go and govern there. They're colonial power. That's how colonialists behave. You go there, you collect the resources, and you come back. And on weekends, everybody who's governing Abuja is in Lagos on the weekend. So those people we have to talk to. They're not interested in the subsidiarity of power, and therefore they're not interested in governing in the interest of the individuals who are to, because those individuals will pay them off at the end of the year, and then when election time comes, and they will take the money. I remember talking to a barman in one of the elections some years ago, and I said to him, look, if someone promises you free housing, education for your children once he's elected on this, or 5,000 naira, I say, okay, I'll take the 5,000 naira. That one I can hold it today. So who's to blame? And people are bribed of a variety of things. Some people take 5,000 naira, some people take the promise of a position in government. And sometimes you'll be surprised that people that you're talking to who are sitting down there saying, I look to continue with you. When night turns to day, as Bob Marley says, a lot of people will run away. So this is just a fact. The real political challenge is in activating, sensitizing, and organizing the lowest level of the highest number of people. We're not really attuned to that, no.
So, I mean,
you eat pizza and drink Italian wine. What else do you want in life?
Nothing.
Okay.
So, I mean, I want to touch on that's the representation critic of the Constitution. There's also the ink on paper critic, which is
the
ink on paper.
Right, okay.
So, we have laws.
Yes.
Our Constitution, faulty or defective as it is, are starting universals, which maybe for reasons of mimicry, we inserted.
I just need to take off my jacket. It's a bit warm. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
sure. Okay.
So you have things like freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of religion,
Yes.
in the law.
Yes.
But when the time comes,
Yes.
you find that those rights, you cannot enforce them unless you have political pool, so to speak. My personal favorite is you can actually, in this democracy, you can have people gather and say they want to protest, and the police show up and say, oh no, you can't do this or that. And right there and then, the police will be telling the press that, no, it's okay. The freedom to protest is in the Constitution. You have the right to protest. It's just that you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. You say something and DSS comes to your house and arrests you. But yeah, but I have a constitutional right to free speech. But then you have some act that was passed, Cybercrime Act or whatever, that basically criminalizes speech that you can go to jail for. So we sort of pick and choose what to enforce and what not to enforce. Another example is the Ways and Means issue, where in flagrant disregard for the law, the central bank kept making these advances to the federal government, and nobody moved the muscle to say that this is illegal.
Not even you.
Oh well, I did. on my personal platform, I did. You know, I did. There are evidence of that all over the internet. I did. So, but you know, who decides what and what to enforce? Who, if the law is being broken, especially because the rule of law basically regulates the relationship between the people and their government. If the people in charge of the citizens, the government in this case, is breaking the law, who is the enforcer?
Well, you're right. The law is the rules for regulating society. And you spoke earlier about all eyes on the judiciary. I like that idea, because you cannot leave institutions to function without oversight. Ultimately, the people have oversight for these institutions. If those institutions aren't functioning to the level that is required, it is a problem, because ultimately it will defeat the organization of society. But then we have to make it work. So it's true, you talk about the Cybercrime Act. I think that certain sections of the Cybercrime Act are against the Constitution. Someone needs to challenge it. So there's this famous case now about tomato paste.
Yeah.
I think that she probably can't be convicted on that section of the Cybercrime Act. Nobody has tested it, and it's being used by police to exploit it. And the National Assembly can pass whatever they want. But then they often refer to the Constitution as the basic law, the ground norm, the law above all other laws, which assumes you've consented to it. But let's assume we have. On its face, it says that we have consented to the Constitution, and it says so. It starts, "We the people of Nigeria." Of course, this is not true, but the fact is that it recognizes that it has to be by consent of the people.
Yeah.
And if we accept it, and the legality of our society requires that the courts must recognize that that is a fundamental law. So if it is contravened in a certain way, you need to challenge it. I'm surprised nobody has challenged the Cybercrime Act as an infringement of the right of free speech guaranteed in the Constitution. But even the right of free speech is subject to limitation to laws of libel, defamation, etc. And that can be done. And that is, again, recognized as an essential function of regulating the relationship between people in a society. But then there are many aspects of our law. You're right, the National Assembly. So the National Assembly does not permits the government to continue breaching the Ways and Means provisions. And nobody will, because it benefits them, because those people are exactly on the same team. So there's a problem with who's representing us in the National Assembly. So again, I should be more interested with the House of Representative member for Etiesa than with the governor or with the president. You know, I have friends in America who will tell you that they know a very big politician, and the rest of them telling me this. You know, my father is an important politician. I thought, you know, it must be the governor in my continent, and he was chairman of the schools board. But this is an extremely important position. The president of the United States cannot tell the Georgia school board how to run their schools. And this is so we need to, if we recognize the importance of subsidiarity in governance, then we will concentrate on those areas. And most of the things that affect our daily lives are not determined in Abuja, or they shouldn't be determined in Abuja. well focused. Everything that happened this week. I remember some of the former Chief Justice of Nigeria saying that, something goes wrong in Bauchi High Court or Bauchi Area Court, and he sees his picture in the newspaper. Well, that's because that's the only person they know. They don't know the Chief Judge of Bauchi State or the Inspector of Area Court in Bauchi State. But in other federations, they elect judges, and they elect the DA, and they elect the fire chief. If the fire chief has to account to you in 3 years' time, the president's not going to save him, because the people in Georgia may vote different from people in California. So the president is looking for his own path to presidency. He says, I can't win Georgia, I can't win Oregon, I can win Massachusetts. So your problem in Oregon is you sort out yourself. So you have to account for people. But this question, everything depends on the federal government. It enables them to escape regulation. And once they're elected, they go to Abuja. Because I remember a friend in Lagos who was elected member for the House of Reps for TSR, and I was at the function at the club, and someone said to him, so guy, let me just not cover his, as they say let me hide his name with this, let him hide his secret with his name. And he said, that's some problem, but it's yours. And he turned to him and said, do you think you put me in the House of Reps? What he said. And he's right. He doesn't have to answer to you. So that is the problem. And if I'm in the House of Reps and they say there's a problem with central bank ways and means, I should come for an approval which contravenes the law, someone should have told me, and have money to run their own office, should have told me, I should say, it should stop. But then they just say, look, it's not a problem. You get your share of the 21 billion. So, well, you should have said that from the start. That's exactly the way it works. So we have to hold every individual to account. And ourselves, they say that the office of the citizen is the most important office.
Is that true, though?
Well, it is, because legally and logically, power comes from the people. That is what democracy means. It may not, the practical result may be difficult to determine, but ultimately that's what it is. So you have to take the power that they said you have. I'm not suggesting that we should burn down the government, but if the local police is acting consistent with the law and with the interests of the community that it is policing, it's for that community to hold them to account. You can't. Someone said to me many years ago, a young firebrand said to me, Oga, that if all the police and army in Nigeria line up from Wharf, can they reach Mile 2? It's consent that allows them to have power. And part of the consent is the authority, legal authority that they have, because they can't put down the entire nation. That consent is fundamental to the power that they exercise. That we say, no, he's a police officer. Everybody move out of this room. He's a police officer. But if you reject his authority, and if he makes his authority legitimate, ultimately, that power can be taken. It's the people. And governments respond to agitation on the streets. They have to pacify the people. Part of pacifying them is providing them their needs, or bribing their leaders.
So, because I sort of think that this disempowered relationship that Nigerians have with the state is individual, and it's psychological the way it scales. If I believe that I have rights, and that's how I live my life, there's a high probability that the next guy to me holds the same belief, and it sort of scales. Because talking about this agitation, the Erisco case is a very good example. The reason why this is a thing right now is because some organizations, either through the internet or whatever, have taken that fight on her behalf. Because what you find is, as an individual, she does not see herself as someone who possesses that power. The law does not recognize your rights as an individual. the way people get anything done in Nigeria is by acting in groups. You know, if you were a member of some association who can make a lot of noise, even better if they have the capacity for violence, you know, this will all be settled. You know, like, you know, there's a political solution for everything. Let's not escalate. But the way the law just tramples all over you as an individual Nigerian, you know, you're driving, the police get down. What do you have here? And you do not feel empowered to complain in any way. So I'm interested in drilling that why in our relationship, our perception of the law and the disempowerment that we live, where does it come from?
It's very interesting. I mean, the classical study, I think, of the American political system, which we copied here, is Alexis de Tocqueville. And he talks about America being made up of tribes. And when we talk about tribes in our environment, we think it's Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa. But every interest group is a tribe. And the idea of American political society is that all those little tribes form into little groups to preserve and protect and advance their own interests. So the idea of that political system which we've inherited here, which is it's not uncommon, is that you can't stand by yourself. The fundamentals of organizing a civil society is that a man and a woman cannot live alone in the wilderness. You come together for the purposes of your protection, your advance. That's why they say that the first task of the government is your security and safety and security of the individuals. Why? Because that's why we came together in the first place. You have to decide how it started. We didn't just create Nigeria because you said a community. So you created in a small Idoma group, had different families who decided, well, look, we have a common enemy. It's the forest, or it's the river, or it's the marauding groups from the next town. So we need to get together and build a wall. That's how communities organize. You organize around things you believe and around your interest. So everybody should belong to some sort of, there's nothing wrong with belonging to tribal associations. And I mean tribes to be beyond ethnicity. So someone asked me the other day, why we have all these groups in the law? Christian Lawyers Association, Muslim Lawyers Association, Idoma Lawyers Association, and she was complaining bitterly about it. And it's problematic if you have been trained to think that there's something wrong about being tribal. The people who founded Nigeria negotiated the constitution of Nigeria on the basis that different tribes have different interests. And again, I use tribes not just for because even in each region of Nigeria then, when the regional leaders were negotiating Nigerian independence, there were tribes and interests that crossed religion, that crossed ethnicity, that crossed territory. So the fact is that you have to recognize, you have to start in any political society by recognizing those who identify. Who are those? Who is your tribe? And I've said it before, there are people who come from Zaria and from Kano who are more my tribe than people who come from Lagos. And if there's a political issue, we will organize around those interests. I'm not going to, I will never organize on the basis of blood. I mean, obviously my children and my family, that's important to me. But even that, I have to decide for myself, is it in the interest of my family from Lagos Southwest to ally with somebody from Benue State? And it may be, even against somebody else from Lagos State. And you have to decide, but the genius of the American political system is that they organized a constitution which made all these tribes feed into an idea about the unity of the nation. What is the Latin motto? Et pluribus unum, from the many, the one. This is what federalism is. There's a federal constitution in India, there's a federal constitution in Canada and Australia. All those recognize that over a vast territory, you must have a vast range of interests. Even in Lagos, even in New York, you have a vast array of interests. They're entitled to be heard. If they're not heard, they will not be represented. If they're not represented, the system will not accommodate their needs. And you come to negotiate. Every political agitation is a negotiation. That's what it is. Why do we get up? We don't sit down and campaign. What you need to do is, who is on my side? Guys, we need to go and meet the governor. Let the governor say that women selling adire in Oshodi, that's an interest group. Weavers, tailors, they're all the National Union of Road Transport Workers is a highly effective political institution. And this is not just now. The National Union of Road Transport Workers was a fundamental of political organization under the Old Western region. I can speak about that. I don't know about how they organize in other places, but in the north, the Northern Elements Progressive Union, what do they call I can't remember the name of the political party, Ahmadu Bello. But it was formed by the inspiration of the British governor to unite disparate political interests in the north to find a common interest of North which needed to be fought for at the federal level. You have to find, develop, and promote those interests to create ideal institutions. So if you are a black Baptist in New York and you were rough-handed by police, people are going to fight for you. Don't stand by yourself and say, I'm doing it by myself. If you are a Jewish American in Brooklyn, somebody is going to fight for you. This is why you find political power in churches and in mosques, because it's where people go to. This is where they go to. If you have a problem, you go first to the imam. I have a problem with my rent. Same thing with politics. A politician in Baltimore has cash in his pocket to solve people's daily problems. But in Nigeria, they say the politician has given out cash. The purpose of government and politics is to solve people's problems. That is it. If you're not solving my problem, you're not a politician working for me. And they have to solve problems. Let's not look down on solving problems, because we can solve our problems by calling the governor. Ordinary people have problems with rent. And the same way that a politician in Lagos is going to help somebody with rent, a politician in New York is going to help somebody with rent. Politicians in the UK, the MPs have clinics every month or every week. What are they doing? Solving people's problems. And the simple problem is, I haven't got on the NHS list. My mother has a heart problem. Well, I'm going to give a call to the doctor for you. That's their job. They're to solve problems. We tend to look at the high of it, and we look at even the Constitution. If the Constitution is not properly constructed, it's not going to work to achieve the political system that we want. But it's almost a chicken and egg situation. We can't change the Constitution unless we change the politics on the ground. We want to fight from somewhere. We want to fight for ourselves, and there's nothing wrong with organizing according to interests.
So, talk about solving people's problems. Let's talk about the economy for a bit. I don't even know where to start from, but so after political consensus, what gives any government its authority is the law,
Yes.
right? And then you have regulations and policies that clearly, rather than solve problems, they make your life worse. So I want to explore what are the legal options or even the legality of that. We learned from codes that a regulation should try to mimic what two or more parties can reasonably agree to.
A regulation.
Yeah. Not the law, just a regulation, which can also be a law in certain cases. But if, for example, if you are engaging in a form of legitimate commerce, and I call it legitimate because you do not constitute any negative externality to anybody around you, whether pollution or in any kind of way. But some government come because of maybe certain interest groups or some people who are interested in protecting and say, for example, trading rice across the border is illegal, and they start arresting you and seizing your goods and setting it on fire or gifting it or taking it to the house of customs officers. Or how is that legal? If it is it fair? Yeah, about a year ago, we had this cash crisis, which still persists because some people seated somewhere with the central bank government to say, oh, this is what we want. And by certain estimates, because of that policy, about 15 trillion naira in the economy vanished. That didn't solve any problem. It didn't make anybody's life better. It clearly made it worse. How should we the people respond in such situations?
You know, when you talk about legality, it's interesting to again, you know, when I talk about lawyers think about the Constitution as a bunch of sections on a piece of paper. Slavery was legal, as someone pointed out recently. Apartheid was legal. It became legal for United Kingdom and foreign powers to come and seize territory in Africa and in Asia and create a new legal order based on their conquest. So again, I'm talking about political problems have to be solved by political means. And sometimes it's untidy defending political rights against legality. Because legality is where you start from. You can, if something if law or regulation is made for a particular, it's always for a purpose, you know. If free trade is a part of our fundamental belief, then all our laws should guarantee and protect free trade. But if it's not, if the philosophy of our economy is that certain captains can control and exploit it, so a big company that produces cement and nobody else can produce cement, or only 3 people can produce cement, or not to name names, then if those people are able to capture the government, they will enact law to protect themselves. And that's what you're talking about. So when you say, so ordinary people are I'm going across the border and buying bread from Cotonou and bring it to Nigeria because that's how I make my own interest. But it's not in the interest of those who import Ukrainian or American wheat and who want it to be produced in Lagos because there's a huge markup on those things. So those people are the ones who are controlling the government. Understand that. So people use the instrumentality of government to promote their own interests. We can either surrender to it, or we can say that my own interest is also important and I'm going to fight for it. But then, you know, everything, we can talk and talk, but if you don't change the game on the ground, things will be done over your head. What did Chief Abiola said? You cannot barb a man's head in his absence. Well, actually you can. It's your absence that allows your head to be barbed when you're not there. You'll get home and find your hair has been barbed. And you say, I wasn't even at the meeting. So that we have to participate. This is the thing. That you cannot, nobody's going to do it for you. Why on earth should I having absolute power exercise in your favor? Why? Well, one reason is to keep you quiet so that you don't disturb me, so that I don't hear your noise when I'm sitting in my high tower mansion. So I'll give you something. But if you want more, you have to ask for it. And sometimes asking for it can be ugly.
I mean, final question before we go to the Q&A.
Okay.
Earlier we talked about we were talking about the Constitution and how it should represent the culture, the beliefs, and what the people want, basically. But so in crafting such a consensus, there is always a question of the law sometimes creating a legal caste. So if we go by, say, popular consensus in Nigeria today, I'm sure if we have constitutional consultation forums in every region, or there are certain things that are sure to emerge if we go by what the majority want. I'm fairly certain that it will resemble some form of protectionism, some form of theocratic governance, and things that are extremely intolerant to certain ways of life that we think violates popular culture. Right? So now the law then has a design problem in that situation. So how can you better shape the law to avoid tyranny of the majority?
By participation of every minority. And every minority is a minority. In every situation there's a minority, but that minority may be in the majority on a different question. You have to find a way to deal with those with whom you are in a majority in certain areas to ensure that in the areas where you're a minority, there's protection also. you can't, again, you can't depend on people who have absolute power to exercise the law in your favor. So if you recognize that they're going to exercise this power, you have to find consensus. This is a political task. Finding people who agree with you. Like I said, every Nigerian is a minority in one way or the other. If you're gay, if you're Muslim, if you're Christian, if you whatever area it is, you're a minority in some way. You have to, the system, the constitution ought to be able to make it easy for that to be achieved, and even this constitution can make that possible. But you have to decide, I'm a minority in this, but in respect of this guy's interest, I will join his majority to defend his interests so that he will defend mine. That's politics. You can't agree on everything, and this is when you create a federal constitution, you're creating a system where people can negotiate interests and negotiate rights. You can't get everything you want, but you can get more than you would have if you stood alone. Politics, every political agitation is a negotiation. Everybody wants something, and what I want will often conflict with what you want. But then we can find a way to agree in small communities, and then we can take the alliances we have. It's a patchwork of alliances that make a political system across the country. And it will surprise you that the thing that you're looking for in Lagos, maybe some guy or some group in Maiduguri. NSARS was a great example. I know that a lot of people in the South, a lot of young people in particular, became very militant over what was happening with the police, and it was a cri de coeur, as they say, for civil rights in Nigeria. But I was also involved in groups in the North, and I remember there was an attempt to draw all these interests together to pull in the same direction. It didn't succeed because NSARS was painted as a exclusively Southern struggle, and as someone pointed out to me, over 65,000 young people at that stage had been killed in the North by police and security agencies. Nobody mentioned it once in all this agitation in NSARS. So they said it's your problem. But then it was exactly the same problem. And if that connection had been made, I'm sorry, but the government would have fallen. I'm not saying that's the purpose, but the government would not have been able to stand. But then once you can divide people, once you can tell, you see those people there, it's those Yoruba people, or it's those Igbo people. Once you can do that, it is a perfect model for elite governance. The British are the ones who practiced that first in Nigeria. Divide and rule was divide and rule was the benchmark of British colonialism across the world. You just simply found somewhere. So if you remove somebody as king, you simply bring his brother. They did it in Egypt and Sudan. They did it in Nigeria. It's very simple, and our governments learn to do that. Just one Yoruba guy is talking nonsense. You find someone from the same town and you give him the job. You make this guy becomes an enemy. There's no common interest because elite, see, interest is what we can eat today. This is why I don't sympathize with all this complaints about dollars, because what do most of the people like me use dollars? These Italian shoes and bags. It's irrelevant to the development of our economy. I've recently been arranged to get beans from Benue State and yams. This is what we should be doing. Local produce. And indeed, it is better food than Thai rice. Why am I eating Thai rice? When we were children, we didn't eat Thai rice. It was local rice. And on Sunday, we used to take the stones out of it and cook it. And we used to eat chicken on Sunday. And now, my driver probably eats 2 chickens at a sitting. How is that sustainable? How is that even attractive? We have to. Part of regulating ourselves is deciding what is in our interest, and then creating political systems that advance our genuine interests, not the things we like, but the things that we need. All these things that we're looking for all over the world, we do them here. The story I like to tell, because I was involved in cassava manufacture at some stage. In Indonesia, Indomie, which we eat here, is Indonesian noodles. In Indonesia, they make noodles with cassava flour. Nigeria is the largest producer of cassava in the world. But in Nigeria, we make Indomie with Ukrainian wheat. I was in a meeting where this discussion was had about putting 15% cassava flour inclusion into the production of bread in Nigeria. And sat in this meeting with the minister, and I remember the minister came in addition then saying, he's going to promote cassava inclusion because I'm the Minister of Agriculture of Nigeria, not the Minister of Agriculture of Ukraine. And in the room were the big people. Again, no need to mention their names. Kumantaros, Dangote. They were totally unimpressed because they import American and Ukrainian wheat. And they said, nice system for making, there's money to be made from that. The way many of these produce, I'm not saying this is how theirs works, but Ukrainian wheat is $100 a ton. You sell it to your company in London for $200, and you collect $250 from the Nigerian bank. The Nigerian bank takes the FX. You bring in the $100 of wheat and keep $150 in London. It's very simple. Why, if I'm doing that, why on earth do I want to have cassava inclusion? It's pointless. Let me use cassava for Gary. Cassava flour. Actually, you know, that meeting, how did it start? We sat on this meeting, and I was there with a group of a company that I was involved with. And Akim Additional called people to the meeting. And while the meeting was going on, somebody went around with sliced bread. And he said everybody should taste it, and they tasted it. It's very nice, very nice. And he said that has 15%, 20% cassava inclusion. People could tell the difference. When they said we must make beer with local sorghum, people said the beer won't work. It's been done for the last 30 years. Don't use hops from Belgium. But then they tasted this thing, and then he started the discussion. So they'd gone to Federal, FIRA, I think it's called, Federal Institute of Industrial Research or something, and they put cassava flour into bread, and they served it at this meeting. And you couldn't tell the difference. But then, cassava flour does not work because it does not work for the oligarchs who control the imported wheat market. That's a political problem. And then we're distracting ourselves over irrelevant things while we're being given bread which is not good for us, high in gluten, high in relevant minerals. And we're looking at the wrong enemy. We're looking at ourselves, but then we need to. So that is an interest. If you can organize yourself alone on the basis of you want to have the cassava revolution. Nigeria is the largest producer of cassava in the world. But we don't make bread from cassava flour in Nigeria. Stupid.
We do. We can buy bread with cassava flour. Just no one likes it.
No one likes it.
Like I'm saying, like we definitely do. Like you can buy bread with cassava flour.
Oh really? Okay. In Lagos?
Yes.
Okay.
They sell it at Rene.
Ah, okay.
Right? And it's like 200 naira cheaper than the other bread.
Well, there you go. So someone's thinking about that. I'm glad to know that. Do you like it?
No.
Because there's a reason why.
Okay, you're used to the taste of American wheat.
That's fair.
Choices
you have
and
grown up
things
eating
like
it.
that.
It's like it doesn't absorb. Like it's like a doughier, like slightly thicker thing. And you can understand if you had grown up eating it, you wouldn't like the airiness of gluten-rich wheat bread as much, right? Because you would just be like, this bread is weird. But we do. It's the market that has actually, in that particular instance, right? It's the market that keeps the wheat bread.
I understand, but how was the market in American wheat created?
I don't say that there's not a place for
But we
policy.
also export cassava flour to the US for
That's my
gluten-free bread. So it's not.
So that's my point about particularly when it comes to food.
Yes.
Attempting to dictate by
Taste.
policy what people's taste should be seems like not like.
But do you accept that a country should determine its economic policy according to economic interest? Gandhi insisted that, by example, that Indians should use salt and local spun Indian fabric rather than textiles from Manchester. It was a political decision. It wasn't by force, but his example changed the way Indians thought. So I agree. There's some libertarian view that you can't force people. I agree that. But then, would you not say it would be helpful to encourage people to use local produce?
Of course, but people should also export local produce.
Sure.
It's two sides of the same coin, right? Which is, sorry, I I don't want to push.
No,
please.
So go ahead. Go ahead. Q&A. So go ahead.
Q&A portion. But like, I guess like my thinking is like Nigerian law. You know, there's the phrase, the law's an ass, right? But it seems as if
it's not really a phrase. but non-lawyers say that quite often. The law is not an ass. But then I get the point. It's often said. Pardon me? No, I know. Pulling your leg. Yes.
So my point about it is, but like Nigerian law seems structured to kind of be ridiculous.
Yes.
Right? So if you ask anyone, should a Facebook post about tomato paste, as complaining in the town square about a particular tomato paste being illegal?
Yeah.
No. Should I grow this rice on my own land with my own labor and I want to sell it to Cameroon, to Eastern Cameroon? Should that be illegal? Most Nigerians will again say no. It seems as if we structure our laws to kind of be unworkable because we know that there's going to be an extra legal workaround of everything that we actually do in Nigeria, right? Why are the police stopping you to, like, everyone knows that, okay, this law doesn't make sense, or if it was put to a poll, most people wouldn't agree, but we do it anyway because it gives a lot of room for, once again, justifying law breaking, and everyone has the laws they want to break, right? So if the law in general is an ass, right, then everything has a political solution in the end, like a man, no man, or an interest group or something. But like Nigeria is designed to be worked around.
You know, the pejorative that law is an ass is not invented in Nigeria, so it's not local. The fact is that every country regulates economic activity. If exporting Ukrainian wheat is not an interest of Ukraine, they will ban the export of Ukrainian wheat. Every country does that. Microchips cannot be sent to China. TikTok is about to be banned in America, even though it's pure commerce. The fact is, every nation is entitled to protect its own economic interests by law and regulation. That doesn't make the law an ass. Anybody who tries to sidestep it, they may do so, but they may do so for their own personal purposes. And that, again, is an attempt to subvert the interests of the large majority. It is not unreasonable to have a legal provision which protects the majority of Nigerians. Or the majority, there again, majority depends on which interest is dictating that. But the fact is that the idea of law is that the majority regulates the behavior across the board in its interest.
But that's not that's maybe the idea of democracy. That's certainly not the idea of law.
What's the idea of law?
So I mean, like, usually in most of human history, is that what the king says
for his own interest.
Yeah, but he's not the majority. I'm just saying, like, if you
I just said it depends on how you characterize the majority. If 5 people control the government, that's the majority.
Well, okay.
So the point is, yes. So the purpose of law, democracy is one thing. Democracy assumes that you will legislate in the greatest interest of the greatest number. And that's the whole idea. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. But law in its pure form. So you may say that the law created by King Hammurabi of Babylon is an ass because it favors only him and his people. But then it's not an ass because that law has been intended to protect a specific interest. And it may be stupid to those who doesn't protect, but it's perfectly understandable for those who are in the elite.
But what if the law makes the majority worse off?
That's a democratic, not a legal problem. So we'll talk about democracy and the rule of law. We aspire to a democratic system based on the rule of law, because we think that a democratic system is the most stable and the most potentially progressive. Democracies seem to fare better economically because they allow people to organize, to plan and to develop, and there's safety and predictability. So it's desirable. And that's why autocratic governments, like the English is a great example. The king ruled by fear. The king, the idea that the English king was under no one except the law is 200 years old, or when was Magna Carta? The king had an absolute authority. But then it didn't work because he needed money from the kings. The French Revolution, it started from the fact that the king of France had run out of money pursuing the Louisiana Purchase, and he needed to ask the other states for money. And they said, yeah, we'll give it to you on this condition. So this is how you mitigate autocracy by political activity. It becomes difficult. It's difficult to maintain an autocracy because you have to keep taking from people, and you have to keep extending. And you can't. The more people who take the wealth, the less people are satisfied. The more unstable the political equation becomes. You have to try and make the political equation as fair as possible, ostensibly, so that you and I are willing to sit down and be quiet and say, well, it's okay, you know, I know what I'm going to do, so I'll be fine. If people like you and me feel there's no hope, and I remember how it was described in the French Revolution, that the people were hungry, and their hunger overcame their fear. This is a fact. People are not, if you give people the minimum that they require, they'll let you get on with it. They'll let you take everything. This is the fact, and this is how human society originated, conferring power absolutely on individuals. But with the development of political society, it ceased to work well because you needed to consult so that there was peace, and then there was war. You had to get, in many countries, you had to fight wars, so you had to go and consult all people. The king cannot fight the war by himself, so he needs to say, guys, I need troops, I need your people. Okay, yeah, but we want this. That's how rights develop. It's political negotiation. So, but then if we want the law to suit our own interests, we have to fight for it politically. But it's legitimate to create a legal system that favors a certain idea about who your society is.
I have a question about, you have some respectful pushback around that, because you talked about constitutional consultation,
yes,
and value, creating a common value, and
right,
you referenced America,
yeah,
and you were talking about that, in the sense of getting a majority view and kind of
yes,
negotiating majority,
yes,
but people also say that America was founded on by few men on Judeo-Christian values,
sure,
and so isn't that an example of the minority really, them having luck with a minority that was, I guess, had a lot of foresight around what type of society they wanted, other people kind of falling into that? Because how do you then negotiate, for common interests across Nigeria when there is such, especially like a socioeconomic divide, and like you say, the elites are quite predatory. Is that not kind of a utopic wish, because, and are we not better off kind of hoping for a sensible minority of people to come and dictate what the values or what the national ideal of Nigeria is?
We can hope for that. I recognize that. The people, the powers that gathered to create the American United States were few. They were, if you like, little kings themselves. All those colonies were ruled by kings and people who had gone there and seized the land on errand from the British government. Then they created their own kingdoms, and they wanted to resist the king because he was trying to usurp taxation, usurp the powers of their own economic output. Mm-hmm. But then, if you read the thought, the Federalist Papers is the catalogue of thinking and analysis that went into creating the United States Constitution. You will see that they recognized that there was going to be problems. They were trying to invent something. It was actually genius, in my opinion. They had a vision beyond today and beyond their own power. They intended to create something which could survive, and they knew that. So one example, Federalist Paper number 10 is about the problem of factions. Factions are intrinsic to any civil society. And they decided to think about how to contain those factions. How do you stop me from fighting to take that book from you? Well, we have to give you something else. There's a great deal of thought went into creating. This is, they could simply have said, look, we're in power, we're going to be little kings, we'll have a council that meets like the barons under King John in England.
Tax everybody.
And tax everybody. Yeah. Nothing they can do about it. But they recognized, so you're right, they recognized that there was something remarkable that they could do. They even the words of the Declaration of Independence is such a thoughtful document that you can see that. And how many? There were 10 articles or something in the U.S. Constitution. Yeah. So we have this Constitution with 360 sections, which doesn't mostly means nothing because there's no common idea. They recognized that their self-preservation, and the Declaration first of all gave them their marching orders. They recognized that self-preservation required they should create a political dynamic which could survive them. which would be self-sustaining, which would draw in all the interests in the nation and make them work for one purpose. That includes allowing people to Oregon to, if you want to marry children in Utah, that's fine, but we can't marry children if you come to live in California. So if you don't like abortion, if you like abortion is okay in New York, we're going to make it a problem. But certain things eventually, so abortion is not a good example because then you're talking about privacy and women's rights, and that's a problem which the federal government feels the need to regulate across the board. But in many areas, you recognize that they recognize that you have to create mechanisms. There's so many mechanisms and devices. That's why when we adopted this American constitutional system without the thought that goes into deciding how you, because if any Nigerian judge read those papers, for example, the Federalist Papers, and I'm quite sure that most have not, they would see that it was organic and it was intended, and in many respects, it mirrors many of our local systems of political association and governance. But this was the problem. But then we can hope for the genius of a few people.
But I think those people are who you originally called the elites, that people refer to as the elites.
Sure.
And they are predatory.
Yes.
And so I have a follow-up.
So,
To be fair, not all elites are predatory, but then
but
we
the
see a
ones
lot of
who
them.
are
Yes.
here, yeah.
Yes.
And
So even on economic, sorry to address, but even on, one thing that I would say could drive, a national identity is kind of economic prosperity, right?
Yes.
That's something both the common man and the elite can agree on that.
Sure.
So even if that were a vehicle, an instrument rather to use, what are your thoughts on how we could maybe even kind of either reshape the law to promote more of that? Is that possible within the Nigerian whole? And along encouraging economic prosperity, because that's one thing that comes to mind as a thing.
You know what I think? I think that what changes the political trajectory of nations is seismic events, often disaster. I mean, the organization of much of China's political society was originally to tame the Yangtze River. This was the basis of their political organization because it was a disaster every year for the people. Sometimes war, sometimes catastrophe can change the trajectory. So, you talk about economic rights. Sure, it's rational that, a rising tide raises all boats. So it's in the interest of everybody to promote prosperity. If I promote your prosperity, I promote mine as well. The government can get more tax, they can build a bigger pie. It's true. But then, people don't sit down. People react viscerally. They don't generally sit down rationally. That's why I say it was genius that self-interested men in America could sit down. Even the creation of the Democratic and Republican parties, I understand it's more than anecdotally that it was created on a boat ride on the Potomac. They were discussing how to separate the parties. And you need two strong contending entities to contest for power and to negotiate it on the basis of certain pre-understood notions. So the political philosophy exists for all these things. The economic argument for what you propose is sound. But I just think that what worries me is that what changes men's mind is pain. And you'd have thought the Civil War in America was a defining moment as well. It tested the Constitution. But the Civil War in Nigeria should have been such a moment because it was a national disaster which exposed the rawness of every division we had in the country. Of course, the first coup in 1966 was the first that started. But if you talk about the Civil War as a pivotal moment in Nigerian history, many people will tell you that actually the moment was when the government was changed in January 1966. It was the first time that the national consensus about our political was revoked. It was revoked by violence. And the second coup was inevitable, and the Civil War therefore also became inevitable. And I don't think that we've put the fragments back together since then. Those events, in South Africa and Rwanda, there are Truth and Reconciliation Commissions to say what has gone wrong, what have we done wrong, how do we rebuild on that basis. We haven't done that. This is a problem in Nigeria. And if you haven't learned from that period of our life, tremendous 1.5 million people dead, then maybe it'll take another such catastrophe to bring us back Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so we spoke earlier about the cassava bread. I tend to want to look at that from a perspective of branding and how we, if the government is serious about it, I don't think having competing resources would stop us from actually being able to benefit from that. I think it's a matter of branding and lifestyle. We can always sell it to who needs it. But then also talking about the nationalism, I think it's more of reorientation. If we want to look at it that way, I think it's more of a national orientation. Where you said find your tribe. These tribes, do we have communication lines? Is it something that you say it doesn't have to be pain? I think can we talk about, like we're talking here, are there ways to reach other elite tribes where we can have these discussions without any friction, where it's and it's presentation at the end of the day, how we can discuss what we're discussing and pass the message very subtly and have a national plan. But these communication lines go both ways. So we're going to other elite systems, but also straight to the government, because everybody in here has 1, 2, 3, 10 people that they know in government. So it's important that it doesn't have to be agitation, but the conversations must not stop because there's a government there's a new sheriff in town, or these conversations need to keep going on. And I'm glad that I'm listening to how you guys are handling this matter. That's just my contribution.
So my thoughts is that I think there needs to be a certain disrespect for existing conventions in Nigeria. So, I mean, you talked about negotiation. There's a presumptive idea of unity with which our government operates. And the common mantra is the unity of Nigeria is not negotiable. But my thoughts are the unity of Nigeria is precisely what we should negotiate. And find a clear common basis for our coexistence.
I think that the unity of Nigeria is highly desirable.
Yeah, I agree. But to presume,
but I think that you can't preserve it without recognizing that you must negotiate it. That I think is the point. So, especially the military, they will tell you, because they fought a civil war to keep Nigeria one, and almost every military guy, and they're the ones still many controlling the political system now, will tell you the unity of Nigeria is non-negotiable. But it must be negotiable. But I do not believe that Nigeria should be divided. But I believe that without negotiating, and the unity of Nigeria was negotiated by the nationalist leaders, and they came to the conclusion that it was desirable, but there must be a way to negotiate it. The revocation of our independence constitutions was a great disservice. They meant well, maybe. They thought preserving the unity could not be done if you had powerful regions which were pulling in different directions. So they intend to abolish the religion. And they blame a variety of people. I suspect that it was the regional government was abrogated by Iransi. But the fact is that people who continue to operate it, well, there are those who say that Gowon did not abrogate regions, and that until the 12-state structure was created, that they continue to recognize regional governments, even though they've done this unique. Because it's difficult to run a country of this size. I mean, this country is what, 5 times the size of the United Kingdom or something of that nature. How do you run a country of this? There are places in Lagos you can't get to except by water. So even if you want to do election campaign, how do you get those people? Those people need to send to you their own representatives. And that's how it happened. The Ibadan Constitutional Conference in 1951, it was all the groups sent from everywhere in the country to come and discuss. And they say, it's okay, we're going to stay united. But these are the conditions. If that's the condition, then we do it. We sign it off. Sorry, sir.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to the condition by looking at the chapter 2 of the Constitution.
Yes.
The fundamental objective and directive principle of state
Yes.
policy.
Yes.
And at the same time, what I find confusing in the Constitution is the economic justiciability of socio-economic right.
Yes.
Don't you think that this is one of the major original sins of the Constitution?
You know, I have a friend whose specialization is on her entire legal career has been dedicated to fighting for the justiciability of the fundamental rights and directive principles. Well, when they say they're not justiciable, they mean that you cannot seek a specific legal right on the basis of those provisions. But there are directive principles in that everybody interpreting the Constitution is supposed to apply to those as the guiding, if you like, our own Federalist Papers. This is what we thought about when we created the Constitution. So if I'm in doubt as to what the Constitution means, I should go back and say, what was the idea? The Constitution should be interpreted consistent with those principles. So I think it's difficult to say, there are certain rights there which are ambitions. And it's difficult to make them directly enforceable by each individual. So there's something to be said for that. But then I think that courts applying the Constitution ought to give high deference to those directive principles. And if they did so, they would achieve the same objective. But then again, the philosophy, I've said often, our Supreme Court does not evince any clear philosophy about judging. If the English courts, and including the courts they created here in 1860, first of all, were intended to protect a mercantilist idea of the countries, that you're going to promote commerce, you're going to promote trade and industry. This is the purpose. So anytime you go to court, the court is bearing in mind that the purpose of this is to. So let me hear your argument. And that's fine. That's why I say court is a political instrument. But then what is the economic or political philosophy by which our judges decide cases? You have cases, sometimes you go for a court, I've been before a court, we brought witnesses from Paris over a shipping case. And the judge is not sitting, is tired, his wife is doing something in her village. They can come back next month. So 7 people get back on a flight and go back to France and come back. And what does it tell them outside the country? You can't do business there. Because the courts need to function so that people will have confidence in doing business here. If you can't promote my rights, if you can't protect my rights, sorry, you were going to say something. I saw something there.
I have a second question related to this same principle.
Right.
And what this way, looking at the engine of economic general well-being, political parties in Nigeria,
Right.
and I think a provision of the Constitution is saying that any party should have aligned with this fundamental principle.
Yes.
Looking at Nigeria today, which of these parties, I think it's a sensible question.
Yes.
Which of these parties reflect, the ambitions that we have in Chapter 2? Because for many years, we have been running from one movement to the other, and we haven't seen the results.
They say that without ideology, a political party is a conspiracy to seize power. That's what it is. And you're right. It's individuals. You make the law, you take a legalistic view that there's a requirement that parties should conform with these principles. But it's people. It's a conundrum. Unless people have an interest, and you have to participate. The fact is that we leave this to these people. We tell them this terrible. These people, these politicians, they're all thieves. What things they do, and then we go to sleep. You have to determine the 50 people that you know. Do they subscribe to your political view and ambition?
Yeah. So, to buttress on that, I know Pa Adesanya, I think, that man, an old man, is always railing against the Constitution. It's like, let's just do it.
That is Adebanjo.
Adebanjo.
Okay.
And let's just
Adesanya was another old man, but he's past.
old man.
Yes.
Let's just do it with this Constitution and get a new one and something like that. But along the lines of what you're talking about, whenever I think about how the law is and things like that, I think about public law, private law, and the relationship of the people with the government, and how do they hold the government accountable? What is the responsibility of the government to the law?
Yeah.
I'm like, these instruments of law is alien to us.
Yes.
When it came.
Yes.
We really don't know how to use it effectively.
Yes.
But then we have norms that we can easily subscribe to. There are, common grounds, common things we all align with. And I'm like, can't we develop practical laws that we can improve on based on, our, something you said, beliefs?
That's a fantastic question. And I've made this example in the past. 1953, Professor Glander Williams wrote Reith lecture, the BBC Reith lecture,
Yes.
he spoke about the English common law, and he said something which I've always found very powerful. He says that there's no aspect of English common law that does not reflect the beliefs and attitudes of the English people. Law has to be, I think the word is autochthonous, it has to be organic, it has to arise from the beliefs and understanding of the people. Because the people do not recognize the law as coming from them. They treat it as an alien topic. And people, if I go to court and start arguing a complex commercial matter, they're going to say, Candide-Johnson is going to speak English because he wants to cheat me. I've been in discussion, but once you start explaining to them how the law works, they say you're trying to cheat them. Because we don't believe it. This is just a simple fact. And then again, I've heard this said before. You put a Nigerian in the witness box and says, swear by the Bible, swear by the Quran. The next thing is lies. But if you have to swear by Ayelala, it's going to tell you exactly the truth. So this is the fact. And we have systems of government. The Ekpe society, the Ogboni society, those people administered law and exercised authority over people. They even passed death penalties. In many indigenous societies, if a death sentence was passed on, you carried it out yourself. Because people understood it arose from their beliefs, from their understanding, and from their community culture. But then when you bring English company law, I understand that it works in an international context, but people don't understand it. Many Nigerians, I had a discussion with a lawyer who had a disagreement with the overhead contract we signed. And when someone pointed out to him that exactly what I said was what was in the contract, said, what, does he think I'm going to read the contract? So people don't really naturally adhere to a law that is foreign. And Professor Elias, in 1961, wrote a thesis on Nigerian common law, which he proposed just such a thing, that we need to create a system of law which is recognizable. Japanese have Japanese. The French is based on the Code Napoleon. English common law is based on what English people believe and how they organize their society. And we continue to build it, but it comes out from what we believe. But much of our law was transplanted. And people see the whole fancy dress of English common law as so alien that they don't believe it regulates them. In many of our local communities, people will go to a chief or an elder. This is why I like arbitration and mediation, because it's very African. You go, we have a problem in Onitsha, you go and meet the OB. And indeed, I remember the OB of Onitsha coming to the Lagos Court of Arbitration when I was president to talk about the system. They have almost a written system of arbitration, and they record the cases they decide on laws, on lands, etc. So people understand that. And in those cases, you see, the adherence to a decision of a judge is not based on force, it's based on consent. So you sit down and you make a decision, the chief decides, who are you to disagree with what the Lubadan decided in a land dispute? You remove yourself from society. But then a judge wearing red robe and a silly hat is deceiving himself. We don't believe it. And I say so as someone who is a practitioner of the law, who wears a silly hat. But then people, you have to make laws, and this is why another challenge I have is that Nigerian lawyers are so obsessed with the fancy and the frills of this system that they don't even speak clearly. You call a Nigerian lawyer on this, he's going to say section 245 and section 3 provider, but I don't care. I want to know what is the issue with this issue. Yeah, we have a right to life. The Constitution gives me a right to life. That right to life is fundamental to society.
I find lawyers, but she called me a snob, but I find lawyers boring.
There you go. Yeah.
I mean, so we've talked about some of the issues with the laws, how the judiciary goes about their business. And on the other side as well, there's of course the whole issue around not just politicians, but the members of society who are less inclined to listen to what the courts have to say. There's no consent, there's no authority.
Yes.
And we're increasingly getting to a position in which more and more the government, politicians are basically violating the dictates of what the judges hand down.
Yes.
People are no longer interested in seeing justice coming from the court, resort immediately to self-help. And even if decisions are being handed down, people disregard it.
Yes.
So just in terms of the trajectory of the rule of law in Nigeria, we're not going in a great direction. And my question is, what's the end game, right? We talked about having maybe 1 or 2 seismic events that will help us course correct, right? Can we expect that to happen given our current trajectory? Or are we looking at ourselves essentially reverting to almost like a Hobbesian state, where everybody essentially does what's in their individual best interest at all times, damning the consequences or damning whatever the law court says? What's your view?
You know, it's interesting. Many people think we are in a Hobbesian state. And, you know, you're talking about the lady with the tomato.
Yeah.
You know, I think we had this discussion a few days ago. In Nigeria, people think people will test you unless they think you have power. Who's behind that woman? There's nobody behind you. They're going to test you. So it's happening right now. It's happening right now that people assume that in any legal contest, I have to know what is the higher authority that can deal with you. People are willing to flout your rights and threaten even your existence whimsically. So what's the end game? We could have a catastrophe, or we could continue to correct. English is a great. England is the only European country that did not have a revolution. In fact, in Europe, it was every 10 years, 1830, 1848, 1870, there was a revolution across Europe. Kings were killed and beheaded. The English themselves killed their own king. And it was nobles, interested parties, who imposed on King John the rule of law. That the king must be under the law. The king is under no man but under the law, because we own lands and you need us. This is exactly the point, that this is how human history develops. Evolution in self-interest. So the English kings continue to relinquish power till now. They're just a declaration of the Constitution. But they continue to relinquish power in their own self-interest and in preservation of rights which are in the land. Even today, about 80% of the land in England is owned by 3% of the population. Nothing has changed. But they continue to adjust to meet crisis. And this, I found that to be remarkable, that they didn't suffer revolution. They had corn law riots because people said they didn't have money for bread, and they killed several people. Their own NSAS was in 1878 or whenever it was. And the result of that, this is how the Guardian newspaper was created. It was the protest that followed that massacre, what they call the Peterloo Massacre, that created a new political trajectory. So always, French Revolution, of course, was a seismic political event, and almost 60% of the aristocracy was decapitated. Yeah. I mean, you go to the Place Vendôme in Paris. What fascinates me is that for decades you could not eradicate the stench of blood, because they eradicated their aristocracy on an industrial scale and with industrial efficiency. We don't want to see that here because they'll catch some of us. This is so they'll mistake me for part of the aristocracy. This is a problem. You know, I got caught in a riot on Lekki Road one day. You know, and you think it's not going to catch you. I had been out of the country. I arrived that morning. I got into the car, put my golf stuff in the back of the car, and I sat on the back of the Land Cruiser. I was on my computer when an accident occurred on Kingsway, on Lekki Expressway. And then we were there for 3 hours. They blocked the road. 3 children had been knocked down by a truck because they've been asking the government to produce a flyover. Local interests hadn't been attempted by the government. So the youth blocked the road. So eventually all the estates along the road sealed off their gates. I was too far to walk back to VDC where I was living. So I sat in the car thinking this is not going to take too long. AC on. Then the police, they said they want to see the governor. They said the governor was not available. It was then under Fashola. Then the local government chairman came. The Bale came. Succession, dignitaries came to come and talk to them. They weren't going to answer these people. And in the end, one man came and said, okay, after he listened, said, they should open the gates. So the local government, the commissioner of local government came. So I said, who's that man? The youth leader, the local youth leader, has more authority in that area than the governor. Effective. But what affected me was that I was thinking, I'm coming from London, why would I face a riot on an ordinary day? So I came out, you know, folded up my sleeves, you know, took off my watch, you know. I thought I looked really regular down on the street. So I was sort of moving around like this. And someone turned to me and said, okay, get into your car. You are not amongst us. It was very, because my driver came and because I thought I was. And we sat down in the car, the police came, they met with a hail of stones, they went back. Then they threw tear gas. So we were in the car, when police brought tear gas, there was shooting, so we ran into an abandoned building. Then they said tear gas, so I had to run back into the car. Meanwhile, you can just imagine, here was I, fresh from the city of London, not expecting that. I thought I had a 2 o'clock tea time. This was what I was worried about my golf. But it can happen so quickly. And the fact is that we don't look like them. They're going to. We think we're fighting for the masses. The masses don't think you look like them. So this is the danger. So we have to, in advance, make protections. We have to make arrangements for. We don't want to see that catastrophe. We won't make it. We won't all make it to the BA flights to London. This is the fact.
We're not trying to go on BA flights.
Yeah. So
okay. I know that you have a view about that.
yeah.
Yes.
But how do we incorporate? Sorry.
So we'll take Wukong and call to you. We'll take Shadi, then Chris, and call Kafi.
Okay, cool. Thank you again, sir, for everything you said. So insightful. So I think I have my own theory, which is that Nigeria lacks two things, and it seems that almost everything everyone has said has kind of continued to affirm that, which is we lack a sense of community and a lack of the understanding of a future, which is, again, everything that everyone has said, like this idea of how do you get people to organize, like it means that you must care about, even this example you just used about you coming down from your car, thinking that you look like the people, like this sense of a community, and then this sense of I am constantly thinking about the future. And I love when you guys were talking about the American Constitution again, like this idea that these people are constantly thinking about a future or something. I'm a very practical person. I love these talks, but sometimes I feel like talk. What's the action points thing? So I was wondering if there were laws, acts, or things in the Constitution that you feel like at the very least, Nigeria has done well in terms of representing this idea of we care about a community or we care about a future. I was wondering if there's any examples that you have seen that you think we can model, like we the people who, whenever we decide we want to come together and make things better, like we can be like, okay, let's point to that thing because we have seen that this thing that was implemented reflects a sense of I care about the community or this thing cares about the future. And if there's actually not an example that you can think of, I think
that the Bill of Rights. I think the Bill of Rights contained in the Chapter 4 of our Constitution is something that many countries have to fight for, and that Bill of Rights represents a set of fundamentals to our humanity. I mean, the Declaration of the Rights of Man is regarded by many as the foundation for the American Bill of Rights, and indeed it was a manifesto for the French Revolution. The idea that every individual had a right to life, had a right to freedom of religion, had a right to movement, had a right to own property. This guaranteed that they were anchored to the land. That in this place where we organize, I can be the best that I can be. So we may underrate that, because when lawyers start talking about fundamental rights, it just sounds like something fanciful and distant. But in reality, if we defend only that chapter, which is justiciable, if we defend only that chapter, it is a foundation for all our rights and all our future. We have to anchor in that even rights to land, even economic rights. This is where it comes from. Freedom of association, freedom of speech. These are things that guarantee the rights we're talking about. Without those basic rights, we have nothing. And with those basic rights, we have everything. But those basic rights cannot be given to you, even when they write them. People have paid for them with blood everywhere in the world. They paid for them with blood in America. They paid for them with blood in India. They paid for them with blood in the UK. I was telling people, when people talk about the rule of law, when they were establishing rule of law in England, judges could disappear overnight and never be seen again. So the people were saying they're afraid. People gave their life for these rights. People gave their life for these rights. The fact is, I do believe, I do not wish to my own blood to be shed, but I believe that the rights that are in the land are paid for with people's blood. This is why people say, this place where my father was buried, I will never allow it because its blood is in it. And people have fought and died over these things. It's a cause of a lot of conflicts in Nigeria. And I read that Professor Dinkalo's report to the Anambra State government is talking about violence in the southeast and talking about it's not just about separatism, it's about basic rights and often land, communal disputes. These are things that have to be regulated. So maybe that may be a model for looking at how we deal with, because without resolving conflicts in a territory, you can't build anything. And if land is a problem, you have to give people, this is your land. Government cannot come and take my land. My grandmother fought about land taken from her parents in Calabar till she died. And I think, what's this woman? Then I thought, what's this woman going on about? But for her, that was who she was. That land is who I am. They want to build roads. So there has to be a way. I really think that you cannot build a defensible political society. You cannot create value upon values which do not involve the land. This is why I think land reform is so important. But the Land Use Act was inserted in the Constitution to repudiate the rights of people to their land.
I guess the second part to that, and then I'm done, is again, listening to everything everyone has said. I don't know who has watched Game of Thrones. I just constantly think about this idea of power resides where people think it resides. That's power. It's not knowledge, it's not money, it's wherever people
Correct.
think to decide.
Game of Thrones is a political treatise.
Love it. I have this question, which is always chicken and an egg. I'm just curious to hear your own thoughts of. Sometimes I look at Nigeria and I wonder what our culture really is, because it feels like, at least for the past 60 years, our socio-political space has influenced the culture so much that I question what even is the culture. So when we then have these discussions about, let's go back to the roots, let's go back to the people, I question the strength of that, given just how much influence things as everyone keeps saying, just that 1966 coup has shaped Nigeria from top to bottom. How do you then say I want to listen to the people and all that? I'm curious again to you, to what extent do you think that is true? To what extent do you think there's still these cultural, social-cultural norms and beliefs that are really strong, that can push against these already established economical and political influences that have deeply influenced Nigerians across the world?
Yeah, I think that the if you like, the colonial structure has imposed on us a different set of direction, yes. But it didn't eradicate cultures and history. And the battle is trying to allow those cultures, that culture and history to survive the onslaught of law and the regulation in the centralized government that we have today. Because land tenure amongst the Doma, amongst the Efik, amongst the Ibibio, amongst the Yoruba, has not changed much outside the high value areas which the Land Use Act is imposed upon. So those cultures, okay, you have good culture, marriage, etc. Many things change, and you cannot resist change, and you cannot. You must expect change when a different authority is imposed from outside. It happened with the Greeks, and it happened with the Romans, and it happened to what we see in England and in France today is the position of Roman culture. So this is normal, but and we're seeing that almost even these threats of disintegration are assertions of subsidiaries, of the history of subsidiaries. I don't think that you should, when you talk about Yoruba separatism or Igbo separatism, those are again negotiations. And what are people organizing around? They're organizing around their history, their culture, the things they believe, and their land. So those forces have never stopped pushing. Under the colonial government, if the Aba women said they didn't want to be taxed, British sent in troops. This was normal. In Ghana, they sent in troops to take the Ashanti throne. And people resisted it. Women, again, I regret that I have to use Aba women's rights and talk about the Ashanti women's revolt, because women, and what did the Queen Mother in Ashanti say? She said that if there are no men in Ashanti, that the British should know that they are women. Women are a very powerful political force, and that's the history of Nigeria. And so, hey, we'll sit back and see how I'm always happy to support. You know that. Yeah.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for your very insightful comments so far. A theme that seems to keep on coming up that you advocate for is the devolution of at least some power from federal level to more of a state or local level.
Yes.
What is the real leverage there? Is it like some top-down enlightened leader coming in, set of leaders to lead that charge? Is it more of a bottoms-up local organization, some new set of organizations that apply that pressure? Or is it more some, we can't have the political, devolution of power until we have more of an economic, less inequality? Like, what is the lever there?
I think the failure of governance through this structure is being manifest in economic collapse. And I think that is what drives it. They recognize that, so Anambra State now creates its own power system. This is going to be a catalyst for economic development in that area. And it's going to make Anambra different from Abia State. So the value is manifest in the exercise of power. Lagos is an example. Of course, Lagos tried to have its own power done before, but the fact that we're seeing development at levels subsidiary to the national government is exactly what is going to compel this across the country. Because once you gain power, you can't keep it if people aren't satisfied, if they don't have food, if they don't have jobs. It's constant instability. The violence in the southeast is exactly that. It is economic disempowerment that is causing that, but then it's manifesting as separatist agitation and a variety of things. So many of those things cover the basic problems of hunger, need, and what did they talk about when they created the welfare state, the war against hunger, against disease, against ignorance. Those basic needs, if those are met, and they can't be met by the federal government. So the federal government is going to have to cave in because of its incapacity. This is my own opinion. They're going to realize, and then the governors, another you have to realize that in the political equation in Nigeria, the governors are in many respects more powerful than the president.
Absolutely, yep.
So it's in their interest to take more authority so they can do more things, so they can preserve their own political hegemony. And they're going to constrict the president, because every president is going to go to the governors when he wants to be re-elected. And the president can't control the country. So that is where it's going to come from. Necessity is, I think, what is going to be the mother of our invention. And I think that agitation is quite manifest in many places. We're seeing it. We just sometimes don't recognize it. And this happens in political events in transition in many countries. You don't see what the event is. When you go back and read the history, you can see that we can now trace the origin of this event to this, but at the time you can't see it. But I think that those changes there's a high degree of agitation. And states are recognizing, one, that they have the power, and that they need to devolve that power to themselves. And I think that's what's going to be the result. I know whether it's going to be under this administration, but we're going to see it, and they're going to compare states. The whole subsidy question, people are now asking that if the states are getting all this subsidy money, they're getting 3 times their last allocation, why is the governor not fixing the road to my house? He has the money. So the government takes the money, he has to take the responsibility. And the federal government should be happy to say, yeah, look, that's your governor. It's not my responsibility. The President of America is not going to answer what the governor of Georgia did. That's the governor of Georgia's problem. But he's still President of the United States. So I think that evolution will come. And we are witnesses to an evolution in our politics. So we tend to look at it harshly. And we are very discontented. And we're looking at the things that are wrong. But the fact is that it's normal for political society to transition. It's normal. And eventually, some of these things that bother us today will not merit a single line in history. But then they're part of what drives us to where we want to go to. I hope that it will merit more than a line, but I wouldn't be surprised if you're reading history books of 50 years, say a series of agitations occurred in Nigeria between and that include NSAS. Name will not be mentioned. But we think this is the biggest thing that happened since ice cream. It's not. Indeed, in some countries, death of 3 million people doesn't even measure. Another thing is that they want to say human sacrifice, but death and destruction is part of the course of political progress.
So, many thanks to Yemi for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you to you.
So, and many thanks to you for showing up. We do this every quarter. If you don't know, the next session is in June. You can always follow us on Twitter and other spaces to find out the dates. And I look forward to seeing many faces here again. So thank you very much.